Have you ever noticed that some people barely appreciate you when you're available, but the moment you become distant, they suddenly become attentive? They reply faster. They reach out first. They seem more interested than they were before. And if you've experienced this more than once, you've probably asked yourself a question that feels uncomfortable to admit. Why do people seem to value you more when you stop giving them access to you? The frustrating part is that you were never trying to play games. You were simply being yourself. Available, reliable, understanding. You answered messages. You made time for people. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. Yet somehow, the more consistently you showed up, the more invisible you seemed to become. Then the moment you became less available, whether intentionally or not, their behavior changed. And that change forces you to confront a possibility that most people never want to consider. What if appreciation and access are not as closely connected as you were taught to believe? Most people assume that if they give more, they will be valued more. If they are loyal, they will be appreciated. If they are always there, people will recognize their worth. It sounds reasonable, it sounds fair. But your experiences have probably shown you something different. The people who receive the most from you are not always the people who value you the most. And the people who seem most concerned about losing you are often the ones who took your presence for granted when it was freely available. That contradiction is where the real lesson begins. The mistake is believing that people value what you give them. In reality, people often value what they believe they could lose. Those are not the same thing. When something becomes a permanent fixture in their life, their attention slowly adjusts to its presence. Not because they are evil, not because they consciously disrespect it, but because the human mind quickly normalizes what feels guaranteed. The more certain something becomes, the less consciously people think about its importance. And that includes people. You've probably seen this happen without realizing it. A friend who rarely checked on you suddenly becomes concerned when you stop reaching out. A colleague who barely acknowledged your contribution starts noticing when you're no longer solving problems for them. Even in relationships, people sometimes become more attentive after sensing distance than they ever were during periods of constant closeness. At first, this behavior feels hypocritical, but beneath it lies a deeper truth about human attention that most people never learn to recognize. Human attention is not triggered by stability nearly as much as it is triggered by change. When something remains constant, the mind stops actively evaluating it. It becomes part of the background. But the moment that pattern changes, attention returns. Suddenly, people start noticing what was previously invisible. Not because your value increased overnight, but because the interruption forced them to become conscious of something they had unconsciously assumed would always be there. The withdrawal did not create your value, it revealed it. This is where many people draw the wrong conclusion. They assume the answer is to become cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. They start treating relationships like strategic games. They withhold attention. They create artificial scarcity. They try to manufacture value by becoming difficult to reach. Sometimes it works in the short term, but it also creates a fragile kind of influence because it depends on maintaining an illusion. The deeper lesson has nothing to do with pretending not to care. It has everything to do with understanding why your constant availability may have been weakening your position without you realizing it. When you are always available, people stop seeing your attention as a choice. They start seeing it as a feature. Something automatic, something expected. And the moment attention becomes expected, gratitude begins to disappear. Not necessarily because people are ungrateful, but because expectation quietly replaces appreciation. What was once perceived as generosity becomes perceived as normal. What was once valued becomes assumed. And once something is assumed, it no longer receives the same psychological weight. This is why some of the most exhausted people are also the least appreciated. They spend years trying to prove their value through consistency, reliability, and sacrifice. They become the person everyone depends on. The person who never says no. The person who always understands. The person who always makes room for everyone else. Yet instead of receiving more respect, they often find themselves receiving more demands. Because people eventually stop asking whether they can rely on you and start assuming they can, and that assumption changes the entire relationship. Once people begin treating your time, attention, and energy as guaranteed, They stop recognizing the cost behind them. They no longer see the sacrifices you make to remain available. They no longer notice the emotional labor. They no longer think about what you might be giving up. All they see is access. And when access becomes permanent, the value of that access becomes increasingly invisible. Which raises a difficult question. If constant availability can make your value disappear, what actually preserves it? The answer is not distance, it is choice. People value what appears intentional. When your attention is clearly a decision rather than a reflex, it carries weight. Think about the people you respect most. They are not necessarily unavailable. They are not constantly withdrawing. But their time feels deliberate. Their attention feels earned. Their presence feels like something they choose to give, not something they automatically provide. That difference may seem subtle, but psychologically it changes everything. The problem is that many people were taught that being a good person means being endlessly accessible. They learned to equate kindness with self-sacrifice. They learned that saying yes is generous and saying no is selfish. So they keep giving long after their energy is depleted. They keep showing up long after they feel respected. And because they fear disappointing others, they rarely stop to ask a crucial question. Are people valuing me, or are they simply valuing what I provide? That question is uncomfortable because it forces you to separate affection from utility. Many relationships appear strong until the benefits disappear. The friend who always needed advice becomes distant when you stop solving their problems. The colleague who constantly relied on your help loses interest when you establish limits. The person who claimed to appreciate you becomes frustrated the moment access is no longer unlimited. And when that happens, you begin to see something that was hidden before. Some connections were built around your value. Others were built around your availability. Most people never discover the difference because they never change the pattern. They continue giving at the same level for years. They continue responding immediately. They continue making themselves available no matter the cost. As a result, they never get to see how people react when the flow of attention slows down. But the moment you begin protecting your time, even slightly, hidden dynamics start revealing themselves. And what those reactions expose can be surprisingly difficult to ignore. Some people will respect your boundaries without hesitation. They may not like the change at first, but they adapt. They recognize that your time has value because they understand that their own time has value too. But others react very differently. They become irritated, they become demanding, they question your behavior. They act as though your decision to protect your energy is somehow an offense against them. And that reaction reveals something important. The people most upset by your boundaries are often the people who benefited most from your lack of them. This is why pulling away can feel so revealing. It does not merely change how people see you, it changes how you see them. Suddenly, you begin noticing who reaches out only when they need something, who respects limits and who resents them, who values the relationship itself, and who values unrestricted access to you. What once looked like loyalty starts separating into different categories, and with every reaction, a clearer picture of human nature begins to emerge. One of the hardest truths to accept is that many people do not consciously evaluate your worth. They evaluate your usefulness. That sounds cynical at first, but it is often just reality. Human beings naturally pay attention to what affects their interests, their comfort, and their routines. When your presence consistently makes life easier, people grow accustomed to the benefit. When that benefit disappears, they finally become aware of its significance. Not because they suddenly discovered your value, but because they finally felt the absence of it. And this is where many people become bitter. They realize they were appreciated more in their absence than in their presence, and they conclude that people are selfish. Sometimes they are. But bitterness misses the larger lesson. The goal is not to become resentful toward human nature. The goal is to understand it. Because once you understand it, you stop taking certain behaviors personally. You stop expecting people to automatically recognize sacrifices you never communicated. And you stop measuring your worth by how much attention others give you. The deeper shift happens when you realize that your value cannot depend on whether other people notice it. If it does, you become trapped in a cycle of constantly proving yourself. Giving more, explaining more, doing more, hoping that eventually someone will recognize what you bring to the table. But recognition is unpredictable. Human attention is inconsistent, and building your self-worth on something so unstable guarantees frustration. Which leads to a more important question. If other people's recognition cannot be trusted, what should your value rest on instead? If you've spent years trying to understand why certain people have so much influence over your emotions, why you care more than you want to, or why other people's recognition can still affect your sense of worth, you're not alone. Those questions are part of the reason I put together a private ebook called The Art of Strategic Indifference. It's completely free and only available for viewers of this channel. It goes deeper into emotional independence, boundaries, attention, and the psychology of becoming harder to manipulate. If that journey resonates with you, you'll find the link in the description. It has to rest on your own awareness of what you bring. Not arrogance, not superiority, simply clarity. The ability to recognize the value of your time, your attention, your loyalty, and your energy before someone else validates it. Because the moment you require external recognition to confirm your worth, other people gain influence over your emotional state. They become the judges of something they were never qualified to define in the first place. And that dependence quietly gives away more power than most people realize. This is why emotionally independent people often appear calmer than everyone else. They are not constantly monitoring how much appreciation they are receiving. They are not keeping score. They are not chasing reassurance. They understand that some people will recognize their value and others will not. Some relationships will deepen when boundaries appear and others will weaken. Neither outcome changes their understanding of themselves. Their identity is no longer dependent on being constantly acknowledged. It is anchored somewhere deeper. Once you reach that point, something interesting happens. You stop pulling away to create value. You stop creating distance to provoke attention. You stop using absence as a strategy. Instead, you become selective. Your attention goes where it is respected. Your energy goes where it is reciprocated. Your time goes where it aligns with your priorities. And because those choices are genuine rather than manipulative, people begin experiencing your presence differently. It feels intentional, it feels meaningful, it feels scarce in the healthiest sense of the word. At that stage, you no longer need to wonder why people suddenly value you after you pull away. You already understand the mechanism. Human beings often become conscious of value when access changes. They notice what they assumed would always be there. They recognize what they stopped paying attention to. But once you see this pattern clearly, the question is no longer why they behave this way. The more important question becomes whether you will continue making yourself invisible through constant availability, or whether you will finally start treating your own time as something valuable first. Because in the end, the real lesson is not that people only value you after you pull away. The real lesson is that many people only recognize value after they lose automatic access to it. Those are very different things. One interpretation makes you dependent on their reactions. The other gives you clarity about human nature. And clarity changes everything. It allows you to stop chasing appreciation, stop overextending yourself, and stop confusing availability with worth. The moment you understand that distinction, you become harder to use, harder to manipulate, and far less willing to trade your self-respect for acceptance. Most people spend years trying to become more valuable in the eyes of others. They work harder, give more, tolerate more. They assume that if they can just prove themselves enough, appreciation will eventually arrive. But the people who become quietly powerful discover something different. They stop focusing on increasing their value and start focusing on recognizing it. Because value that depends on recognition is fragile. Value that exists regardless of recognition is freedom. The day you truly understand this, people's reactions begin to lose their ability to control you. If someone appreciates your presence, you welcome it. If they take it for granted, you notice it. If they become interested only after losing access to you, you understand why. But none of it determines your worth anymore. And that may be the deepest form of independence there is. Not getting people to value you after you pull away, but reaching a point where your understanding of your own value no longer depends on whether they do. The irony is that the people who are valued most are rarely the ones trying hardest to be valued. They are the ones who understand that their time is finite, their attention is meaningful, and their presence is a choice. They do not withdraw from the world. They simply stop offering themselves without intention. And when you learn to do the same, you uncover the truth hidden beneath this entire experience. People valuing you after you pull away was never the lesson. The lesson was learning to value yourself before they ever did. And once you begin valuing yourself in that way, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The people who genuinely care about you usually do not require unlimited access to maintain the connection. They may miss you, they may notice the change, but they do not punish you for having priorities, boundaries, or a life outside of them. The people who struggle most with your independence are often the ones who benefited from your dependence, and recognizing that difference can save you years of confusion. This is why boundaries are so revealing. They do not change people, they expose them. A boundary is simply information. It tells people where your limits are, what you value, and how you expect to be treated. Yet the responses you receive can reveal motives that were invisible when access was unlimited. Some people adapt because they respect you. Some adapt because they respect themselves. And some resist because the relationship worked better for them when your needs came second. Once you see that distinction, it becomes much harder to ignore what a relationship is truly built on. What makes this difficult is that your instinct may still be to explain yourself, to justify the boundary, to convince people that your decision is reasonable. But the more emotionally independent you become, the more you realize that understanding and agreement are not the same thing. People can understand your boundary perfectly and still dislike it because it no longer serves their interests. And when you stop treating every disagreement as a misunderstanding that must be fixed, you begin reclaiming a level of psychological freedom that most people never reach. There is a subtle shift that happens when you stop needing everyone to approve of your choices. You become less predictable to people who rely on guilt, pressure, or obligation. Not because you become aggressive, but because your decisions are no longer controlled by the fear of disappointing others. And for the first time, you begin seeing how much of your life was shaped by invisible expectations. Expectations you never consciously agreed to, yet followed anyway because you believed keeping everyone comfortable was your responsibility. The moment you stop carrying those expectations, something else changes. You become more selective about where your energy goes. You start noticing which relationships leave you feeling respected and which leave you feeling drained. You pay closer attention to reciprocity. You become less impressed by words and more attentive to patterns. And as your awareness grows, your need for constant validation begins to shrink, because you are no longer evaluating relationships by how wanted you feel. You are evaluating them by how healthy they are. And that shift is more powerful than most people realize. When you stop measuring relationships by attention alone, many illusions begin to disappear. Someone can text you every day and still not respect you. Someone can praise you and still take advantage of you. Someone can claim to care about you while consistently ignoring your boundaries. Attention is easy to give. Respect is not. And once you learn the difference, you stop being distracted by the signals that once convinced you a relationship was stronger than it actually was. What you start looking for instead is something quieter. Consistency, consideration, mutual effort. The people who value you without needing constant access. The people who can tolerate your absence without questioning your worth. The people who respect your limits without demanding explanations. These qualities rarely attract as much attention as dramatic displays of affection, but they reveal something far more important. They reveal whether someone values the relationship itself or merely the convenience it provides. And perhaps that is what this entire experience was trying to teach you from the beginning. Not that people are cruel, not that you should become distant, not that relationships are a game of scarcity, but that access has value. And value becomes easier to protect when you recognize it yourself. The moment you stop giving your time, attention, and energy as though they are unlimited, you begin seeing people more clearly. And when you see people more clearly, you make better decisions about who deserves a place in your life. That clarity is not cynicism, it is wisdom. And wisdom is often what separates a life directed by other people's expectations from a life directed by your own. The next time someone seems to value you more after you pull away, Resist the urge to see it as proof of your worth. Your worth was there long before their attention arrived. See it for what it really is, a reminder that human beings often notice what they stop having access to. Then return your focus to the only thing you can control. Protecting your time, choosing where your energy goes. Building a life that is not dependent on approval. Because the ultimate goal was never to become someone people fear losing. It was to become someone who no longer loses themselves trying to be valued. And when you reach that point, something unexpected happens. You stop asking why people behave the way they do and start paying attention to what their behavior reveals. You stop chasing reassurance and start trusting patterns. You stop measuring yourself by who stays, who leaves, who notices, or who forgets. Because you finally understand a truth that changes the way you move through the world. The people who value you will not need unlimited access to appreciate you. And the people who only value access were never valuing you in the first place. Once you see that clearly, you become calmer, harder to manipulate, and far less willing to give away what should have been protected all along. Your attention, your time, and your peace. The real power then is not learning how to make people miss you. It is learning how to stop abandoning yourself in exchange for being needed. Because the moment your self-respect becomes more important than maintaining unlimited access, everything changes. You see people more clearly. You trust your own judgment more deeply. And you no longer need someone's sudden interest to confirm your value. What once felt like rejection becomes information. What once felt personal becomes understandable. And what once controlled your emotions becomes another part of human nature you finally understand. So if there is one thing to remember, it is this. People valuing you after you pull away is not a strategy to imitate. It is a pattern to understand. The deeper lesson is that your presence should be a conscious choice, not an endless obligation. The moment you stop treating your attention as something everyone is entitled to, you stop living at the mercy of other people's expectations. And in that moment, you become something rare. Not distant, not cold, not indifferent. Just someone who understands their own value well enough to stop giving it away without thought. Because in the end, what this reveals about human nature is not that people only care when you leave. It reveals that attention follows contrast, appreciation often follows absence, and many people do not recognize value until it interrupts their routine. But what it should reveal about you is even more important. Your worth was never supposed to be measured by how urgently someone tries to regain access to you. Real freedom begins when you understand that for yourself. And from that point forward, you no longer spend your life trying to be valued. You spend it becoming someone who cannot be manipulated by the lack of it. And that is why the people who become quietly powerful are not the ones who master other people. They are the ones who stop handing other people control over their sense of worth. They understand human nature without becoming cynical. They set boundaries without becoming cold. They value connection without becoming dependent on it. And because of that, they move through life differently. Calmer, clearer, harder to manipulate. Not because everyone finally learned to value them, but because they finally stopped needing that validation to recognize their own value. If this video helped you see the difference between seeking value and recognizing your own value, then you've already taken a step toward a different way of thinking. And if you want to explore these ideas more deeply, you can download my free private ebook, The Art of Strategic Indifference, linked in the description. I'm curious about your experience. Have you ever noticed someone valuing you more after they lost easy access to you? And what did that teach you about the relationship? If you genuinely found value in this video, consider leaving a like. And if you're interested in emotional independence, strategic thinking, human nature, power dynamics, discipline, and self-mastery, subscribe and continue the journey. The next recommended video expands on these ideas and will help you understand another layer of the hidden dynamics that shape people's behavior. And for those who want to go further, I've also created a Patreon where I share deeper psychological breakdowns, observations, and ideas that are intentionally not structured for public platforms. It's designed for people who genuinely want to master these concepts and think more deeply about human nature, influence, and self-control. Both the free ebook and Patreon links are in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.